Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything, and I'm coming at you with another Wargaming and miniature video. In today's video, we're going to continue on with my 15mm Napoleonic project update. This update is in regards to my upcoming rules, marshals and generals, but also painting the figures and showing you the progress of my painting of the units for Quatre Bras and then eventually Waterloo. What you see in front of you there is the 1st Battalion of the 61st French Line Regiment. A discerning eye might notice that they are no longer on 40mm wide by 15mm depth bases. They are on, that's the old basing method, and these guys are on 20mm wide by 30mm depth. And at the end of the video, I'm going to explain my thought process and why the change. But right now, let's just take a look at my progress with the figures. I've got some artillery I want to show, as well as the next battalion. All right, this is the 2nd Battalion of the 61st Regiment. Now, you'll notice that I did not cut off the eagle for the 2nd Battalion. I just left it on there from these Old Glory models. They come out, they look really good. In both of these battalions, you'll notice that I did a Voltigeur stand, a Grenadier stand, as well as the rest of the battalion. And these are small battalions, so these are only 4 bases, or 16 figures, where a medium size battalion would be 24 figures on 6 bases. Okay, now we're going to get back to these again at the end when I go to explain my thought process. But during the painting, I just want to point out that I am still using the 2.5mm static grass. I think it looks really good at this scale, so I'm going to continue using the 2.5. The flags are GMB. All my French flags are going to be GMB pretty much because I like them better than the Fighting 15s. But the Fighting 15s I like better than the Allied flags. I don't know. There's just, they each have their own, what is the word? Je ne sais quoi. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you my next set of figures, which are my artillery batteries. All right, now here's 3 of the batteries I've done. Now remember, my medium-sized battery or normal battery is going to be 2 guns. I treat these gun figures as anywhere between like 3 and 5. You know, centered around 4, but 3 to 5 guns would be a half battery. Where if you go to like 6 to 8 would be two guns. And the British or Allied batteries were all 6 guns. So you're looking at like 5 9-pounders and 1 howitzer. There are some horse. Who are these guys? These guys are KGL Kuhlmann's battery. Then you got Rogers, if I remember right. No, that's Braun, the Hanover Braun. And then these guys are the Rogers. You'll notice that I put 1 howitzer per 5 other guns. So that's the standard. So because that would be normal. You got your 5 guns and 1 howitzer. So and these are all 9-pounders, except for maybe that one, which I think is a 6-pounder. But it's hard to tell the difference. And the 6-pounders would be in the horse artillery maybe earlier than Quatre Bras, like Peninsula or what have you. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you the next ones. All right, there's the next 3 batteries, and you'll also notice 1 howitzer per allotment there. A bunch of 9-pounders. Now we're looking at Lloyd's battery, Sandham's battery, and Cleves battery. Okay, so you'll notice that I've done 6 batteries for the Allied, and that is true. We got 2 batteries as part of the 1st Division, 2 batteries as part of the 3rd Division, and 2 batteries as part of 5th Division. So for a total of 6 batteries. Now I've got the 6 Allied limbers good to go. I just need to make my Brunswick and my Dutch-Belgian limbers to complete all the artillery for the Allies. Yeah, I had to wait for my 2nd pack of Old Glory foot artillery, mainly because of the foot artillery uniforms. I didn't have enough crew members. I had guns, but I just didn't have enough crew members. And when I ordered them, I went ahead and ordered them a full pack of 9-pounders. All right, now let me go on to the next step of this update. All right, guys, so I wanted to set out all these infantry battalions, and you can see the artillery in the back, but that's no big deal. Okay, so these are the two new basing methods, and these are the 2 old basing methods, right? And so the big difference is, instead of a 40 millimeter frontage per base, right, with a 15 millimeter depth, which is a 1-figure depth, which does look really good, you know, when set up in line, I've gone to a 20 millimeter width by 30 millimeter depth, which on the table is exactly the same as what I'm doing, right? Because there's 2 bases side by side, and these are 2 bases side by side. It still winds up, or front to back actually. So this winds up being 40 millimeters, and this winds up being 40 millimeters, and 2-figure deep, and 2-figure deep, and 30 millimeters deep, and 30 millimeters deep. So a 2-base unit winds up being exactly the same. A 4-base unit, an 8-base unit, a 6-base unit, they all wind up being exactly the same in line. So, because in my line of work, no, in my rules that I'm writing, I want it to be 2 figures deep. I don't want a line like this, right? To me, that's not a line. Well, it is a line, but it doesn't look deep enough for a battalion in line. So I was going to write into the rules that you had to put 2 figures, 2 bases back to back to make a line. And I felt that was extra work or extra explanation to a player that didn't need to be done. Well, it did need to be done based on the way I was basing it. Okay. So with this method, there is no explanation. It is just 1 base wide, side by side. You know, 1 base, side by side is a line. You know, straightforward, no ifs, ands, or buts. Plus, this puts all of the bases on the front rank. There are no bases, per se, in the second rank. Okay, this becomes important when I'm trying to determine how many dice I'm rolling. So this gives me a die, this gives me a die, but I have to remember that I have a second rank of bases. More confusing math with this. Okay. But that's not the reason, because that's easily written into the rules. That's not a problem. Because nothing actually changes mechanically between this and this. The only thing that changes is the explanation. Okay. Something that has nothing to do with the rules, just the playability of moving units. It's harder to move this battalion, especially if it's 6 or 8, which is a standard battalion, as opposed to moving this battalion. These bases are easier. I can actually pick up 4 bases fairly easily and move them around. Like when I'm stacking the table or putting units on the table or picking them up after the game. So it's totally irrelevant, but it just is just an added bonus as opposed to these much harder to grab and pick up and place on the table. Another layer. These are also not exactly, but very close to Napoleon's battles basing style. And if all my armies are based like this, I could technically actually play a Napoleon's battles game if I wanted. I could just say, okay, let's play some Napoleon's battles and whip these guys out, and this would be a brigade as opposed to a battalion or whatever. The difference is these are 30 millimeters deep, where a Napoleon's battles base is 25 millimeters deep. And I could put a line or a statement in my rules stating that if you already have all your units based as Napoleon's battles, just use those, because there would be the main difference is the frontage would wind up being exactly the same, as opposed to 20 millimeter. Napoleon's battles uses 3/4 of an inch, which the difference between the two is negligible. And a Napoleon's battles base is 25 millimeters deep, or 1 inch, as opposed to the 30 millimeters that I'm going with. I just like the 30 millimeter. It just makes the figures just a little bit further apart depth-wise, and it just gives it a better look, in my opinion. Now, if you have an army already based like this, right, you can still use them, just understand the differences, right? I do plan to go through eventually and rebasing them all to this. That's just going to be a pain in the butt after I went through all this work to base all the battalions that I have currently like this. But now I'm going to transition to this. I don't think I'm going to touch that until I finish. Like, I'm going to continue painting and basing them like this. And then once I get everything painted, then I'll go back in and probably rebase. That's what I'm thinking. So that doesn't change, my basing style doesn't change numbers of figures. It doesn't change numbers of bases. So none of that actually changes. There's another added benefit, and that's slopes or hills or what have you. I'm going to use my spoon here. So if I had a unit on a slope, right, going up a hill, and that hill was pretty steep, we're doing pretty good, right? That base is not going to collapse. Okay. Let's take one of these guys, right? I put him on a slope, There, he's not going to collapse, but I should probably grip my spoon better. Okay, so as the slope starts to go up, you're noticing that it tips when I get to about 45 degrees. Not that my hills are going to be 45 degrees. They're probably going to stay around 30 degrees, but you never know, right? You just never know with terrain. Okay, let's go 45. Yeah, that sits on a 45 with no problem. That's just another advantage of going with the deep bases. Okay. Now, something that really changed my mind, the main reason why I even considered it was formations. I've been struggling with, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a couple of bases from this other battalion just so you can see a standard size battalion, right? Okay, we already went over the line. Everybody in line looks good. You have to tell the player, you have to put him in 2 ranks. Where in this one, you don't have to do that, right? Okay. March column. There's no problem. One base wide. And if I wanted to, I could say 2 bases wide is a march column. These wind up being exactly the same. Again, if I wanted it to look like that, I could go and say the battalion's march column is like that. This is definitely 1 base wide. This is 1 base wide as well. But you'll notice the length. But also, I think a march column shouldn't be this wide. Because remember, I made the bases as where I chose the bases that I chose so that the battalions would occupy the correct amount of space on the battlefield that I'm, measurements that I'm using. Right? So with an inch being 50 yards, okay, that is about 75 yards. Right? Now, is a French march column 75 yards wide? Is a battalion march column 75 yards wide? I don't think so. And with 50 yards being an inch, this makes this about 40 yards wide. Yeah, what did I say this was? Wait, 1 inch is 50. Yeah, what did I say, about 75 yards? Yeah, that's 75 yards. So this is going to be approximately 40, maybe just under 40 yards. I'd have to do the math. I'm not doing the math on the top of my head. But a 40-yard wide march column is still kind of big, isn't it? Yes, it is. So we're going to do this. And everybody, 1 base wide, right? You got 1 base wide, you got 1 base wide. This 1 base is very wide. It's just too wide. This makes it much more closer to the proper dimensions, right? Okay. So far, we got line and we got march column, the extremes, right? Now, if you go to in my old system, I was going to do 2 bases wide and 3 bases deep for a column, like an attack column. That looks really good. I like the look of that. The problem with this is There's no problem with this right here. But 2 bases deep, 3 bases deep. This gives me 4 ranks in the column. This only gives me 3. This also gives me a little bit narrower front line than that. This is okay. How do I show you? Okay, here we go. You can see that it's got a narrower frontage. Okay, this is a 6-figure front. This is an 8-figure front. 60 millimeters versus 80 millimeters. Okay. Remember, every fig is on a 10 millimeter frontage. That looks good as an attack column. It's deep enough. It's narrow enough. It's tight. It looks like a tight block. But that also works. This works fine. If I was an 8-figure battalion, that looks really good. This is the way I was planning. This looks really good. If this was an 8-figure battalion, I would still only go with 2 ranks. Now what you see are 2 exact same size units. 80 millimeter frontage, 80 millimeter frontage. The main difference is with this formation, it's 2 ranks deep. With this formation, it's 2 ranks wide, right? So, I don't know. They both exactly look the same. Remember, I'm getting more frontage figures than I am, or bases, than I am with this. But that's not important because attack columns have a special shooting and melee, so it won't really matter that much. It was just forming formations. And this is your standard. And this is your standard. And you're still seeing it's wider than this. Now here comes the trick. This is the one main thing that made me swap. If it was a small battalion, like that, or like that, right? We got 4 bases, 4 bases. Okay. In line, exactly the same. March column. That looks good. That also can look good. It's not a problem. 1 base wide, 1 base wide. It's the middle formation. It's the attack column. How do you form an attack column when you only have 4 bases? Technically, this should be an attack column, dimension-wise, on the based on my historical references. That should be the attack column's dimensions. But I have to form it like that to be a line. Okay, but on this side, I could easily just go like this. Attack column. Right? It winds up being this formation, like this, like this. But what is it? It's actually it's still 2 ranks deep. It's 2 bases wide, so it's not a march column. It's an attack column. It's a line. So basing them like this means I can form all the formations that I want to form easily. Now, I had considered this being the attack column, but you can't because that's a line, right? So I've also considered doing something like this, making this an attack column, because it's an odd formation, but that looks horrible. That doesn't even look like a real formation. So it's just, this just makes it so much better when it comes to organizing your formations. Okay. Square. Okay, this is the formation that's odd. In this set of rules, I could do just the take the back rank, turn it around, now you have a square. Or I could put bases facing out. Now in a small battalion, you actually can form a square with 4 bases. That's not a problem. Square here was going to be very strange. It was going to be 2 figures. You know, it's going to be something like that, or I was going to tighten it up and do something like that. With four bases, it's super easy to do a square. Obviously, it's the 6-figure. Okay, now that looks like a really good square. It really does. But when you start looking at 6 figures, now you're starting to, or at least I was starting to struggle coming up with what a square was. But what I was going to do is just go 2 facing the rear, 2 facing the front, and then 1 facing to each side. And that looks like an okay square. That's not a problem. But when it comes to 6 figures shaped like this, it also becomes very difficult to form any kind of meaningful square. It just looks crazy. So what I'll wind up probably ruling is you just take the back rank and turn them to the rear. You got 1 rank facing forward, 1 rank facing backwards, and maybe 1 base facing to each side. But that doesn't really look like a square now, does it? I mean, even if I was to... Yeah, that doesn't look like a square. So I'm probably just going to turn the back rank around like that. And that works with 8 bases. It works with 6, 4, whatever. So without having to make some kind of crazy base manipulation with these bases, you could just turn the back rank around. And remember, part of my rules, or I should say the tenets of my rules, is fast, fun, and playable. And so I want it to be easily, I want the miniatures to be easily manipulated and no questions asked when it comes to like what formation they're in. So if I've got an 8-figure battalion, front rank, back rank, turned around, single file march column, 2 ranks deep attack column, right? Okay, you're pretty self-explanatory. All right, guys, thank you for understanding my changing of the bases. Going forward, you're going to see my units based as such. And if I get the, if I get the urge to rebase, I'll go back in and grab some of these old based units, tear them apart, and put them on the new bases. But right now, I think I'm just going to progress with basing my units like this going forward from now on. I need to make limbers for my Brunswick and Dutch Belgian units. And last thing I will say, I did get some stovepipe British Shako line infantry in. I was going to use those for the Hanover militia or their Landwehr. And so what I did was I took all the bags of my Hanover and British, dumped them out on the table here, went through them and picked out each battalion that I still needed to finish for Quatre Bras, picked out their standard bearers, their drummers, or buglers, depending on the unit, the Belgic Shakos for certain units, Belgic Shakos for certain officers, bicorns for certain officers, and the stovepipes. And what I did was I took all my Old Glory stovepipes and my minifig stovepipes, and I put them in the battalions, and I actually had a few extras. I could probably do, British line with Belgique, I could probably do another 5 battalions over Waterloo, but just not the stovepipes. So, but there's not a whole lot of units using stovepipes. Just the 28th and the Hanover units mostly, and the 95th. But I had put them in their own little baggies, so every battalion's got its own little baggie. A couple of the battalions already had their flankers painted and based. The problem is they're based like this, so but they are still based, just based wrongly. So what I need to do is, when I do a certain unit and it has a flanker that's already based, at that time I'll probably debase them and base them with their unit when I put the units together. Plus, just thinking about that, thank you, Mind. When I do the rebasing to this, I will be able to use the 2.5 millimeter Statogras. Super, because some of the old units, like these, are on the 2 millimeter Statogras. And I don't know if you can really, on camera, see the difference. You probably can't. I probably have to get something a little closer. You can see how these are kind of cultivated. It looks very, what's the word? Like very short grass, which works okay. But these are just a little bit more, I don't know, wild grass, I guess. I don't know. It just looks better. So I'm going to go with the 2.5s on all the new bases as well. So that'll improve everything. All right, guys. Thanks for coming out and watching this update. Let me edit this, get it online for you guys. And I will see you in the next video.